Hey, deserving listeners, Vanderpump Rules reunion. Let's watch.
I got a great night's sleep last night, and that's never happened. I'm usually very nervous for reunions.
Scandoval, is this your first time seeing the group since news of the affair broke?
Yes.
How are you feeling?
I'm all over the place, to be honest.
Schwartz, this is your first reunion.
I keep looking and hoping that Tom Sandoval will indicate some kernel of sorrow for what he has done and remorse. So that was an opportunity to voice some of that, right? How are you feeling, Tom? Earlier I didn't highlight it, when he was interviewed one-on-one with, I believe, the co-host or the host, his name is Andy, said, "How you doing?" And Tom Sandoval said, "I'm fine," or "I'm good," or something. And it's another opportunity, at the very least, for PR, but also to express yourself how you feel. So if he felt fine, if he's all over the place right now, does that mean somewhere in there is sorrow and remorse? Or is it not there? I have my hypotheses as to why that is. People on the internet, I think, generally would say that he's a narcissist, I think meaning that he's a psychopath, or he suffers from antisocial personality disorder, meaning he has no empathy and he's only self-interested. It's possible. I don't see evidence of that. There would be a lot more evidence. When people have zero empathy, they have, in all domains of their life, they struggle. Because when you don't have empathy for other people, especially when you don't mind exploiting other people, it will show up in a variety of ways. And people who have no empathy or extremely low amounts of empathy and remorse, 99% of the time, their life is a train wreck, meaning that they are in prison, in and out of prison. That's how train wrecky their life is, because they're in a constant state of exploitation and anger and impulse. And I'm not hearing that from Tom. Maybe it's there, but I'm not hearing that. So that's not at the top of my list of hypotheses. So, in the absence of any major barrier personality-wise, of which there are many others besides lack of empathy, you would hopefully hear someone say that they feel bad, especially after you've had some amount of time. So he could have easily said, "Well, I'm feeling extremely horrible and ashamed of what I did, and I'm all over the place." But that's not what he said.
Is there anything you want to say to Ariana or the group at large?
I just want to thank everybody for being...
Pull yourself together, man. This isn't a fucking
You're not
Oscar.
a victim.
You're not at the Oscar.
I'm not a
You're not at the
victim.
Academy
The sad
Awards.
So it's okay to be angry. So that James fella, I think he wants to be snarky all the time. So I don't know how to receive that, but let's hear what Ariana is going to say here.
I just want to thank everybody for being...
Pull yourself together, man. This isn't a fucking
You're not a
Oscar.
victim.
You're not at the Oscar.
I'm
not a
You're not at
victim.
the
The
Academy
sad
Awards.
sack
Not a
act is
victim.
fucking
Not a victim.
bullshit.
Okay, so Ariana is saying it more pointed than what the James fella is saying. Yeah, I mean, again, I've said this earlier, that I get the anger. I get the anger. I get the hurt. I get the pushback from Ariana, for sure. If you're in Ariana's shoes, especially given all the internet talk, people would say, "Hey, you should watch Vanderpump," but maybe you shouldn't, because there's a real toxic online community about this controversy, with some people in the team Tom and some people in the team Ariana, and there's a lot of toxicity and a lot of serious attacking of each other, not just words, but actually bullying and trying to cancel people or that sort of thing. Not specifically, but that kind of talk. And so people were saying, "Oh, you should watch Vanderpump. There's this huge thing. It would be great if you watch." They'd go, "Well, maybe you shouldn't watch." So I don't know that much, but I've heard, people will be protective of me because they know what I've gone through in the past. I won't go into it, but I seriously questioned about just pulling the plug on this whole content thing and shutting down the podcast and just going back to being a professor and a therapist because life was a lot simpler back then. But I've since emotionally recovered, and the listeners, viewers of the podcast and the YouTube channel have been extremely helpful emotionally and supportive, like more than I could ever ask for, more than I ever thought would be possible. So they were worried about that, and I imagine that Ariana has heard or knows about the pro-Tom team. And they're not just pro-Tom, but they're anti-Ariana. They will say that she deserved this or she's this and that. And she's probably been getting that for years and years, right? So you could imagine for Ariana right now would be thinking, oh God, he's crying and now he's going to get all his sympathy. And no, you don't deserve that. And we can imagine that. Having said all that, is Tom legit having a reason to cry, that he's not faking it? You know, is Tom legitimately crying spontaneously? It looks that way to me. I can't know. I have, as I keep repeating, I didn't know that I was signing up for this when I became a therapist and a professor and a supervisor, but I was signing up for becoming extremely experienced in experiencing other people crying. There would be days where I would look back on my day and note that literally everyone I talked to had cried when I talked to them. Every single client, every single student, every single colleague, and then maybe someone in my personal life, because pain is real. And when you're a therapist, obviously, there's going to be a lot of pain focused on and an opportunity, a sacred place so that people can let go and be themselves and cry. And students of mine, it's normal to go through things and it's normal to cry. I would say it's extremely normal to cry a couple times a day, just randomly at random things. You just see a sad news story and you cry, and you see a puppy being saved by a volunteer and you cry. It's normal. Or you just think back on some sadness you've experienced and you cry. So I think that given all my experience with people crying, do I think Tom is faking? It doesn't have the markers of someone that's faking. I've seen what looked to be I can't know because there's no way to know these things. There's no such thing as body language experts. It's not a thing, at least the way that it's framed on the internet. So I can't tell, but it looks real. But I get her anger. I get where it comes from. Even if we didn't think about the internet fighting and the attacking that she's experiencing on her, I get it.
Yeah.
James, don't
James,
hit.
here's the deal. We're
Be a
never
man,
gonna
mate.
get-
Be a man. Put yourself together.
Yeah. Men will act like adults. That's all I'll say to that one.
Fucking crocodile tears, pussy.
I appreciate everybody for being there for Ariana. No matter what was going on in our relationship, she didn't deserve it. Nobody deserves to have that happen.
Nothing happened.
Yeah, so on one hand, I'm thinking, now, I think what Ariana is maybe giving up having waited for, but maybe waiting for, to at least give him a little bit of grace, is the kind of remorse and shame that you would expect someone to have, having committed thousands of transgressions, some big, some small, for the past 8 months on Ariana and a lot of other people. Then maybe Ariana would be able to let him off the hook a little bit, because she's really not letting him off the hook and pouncing on everything. So I think that's what she's looking for. But I will comment on what he said. It is one of the right things that he should be saying. He is saying that I just want to thank everyone, now that you're all here, for being there for Ariana, because she deserves it. That's a good thing to say. But then he phrased it as what happened. For her, she's the most aware of the vibe that Tom is putting out there, right? I'm watching it, but I'm not. My entire soul isn't galvanized and pointed at this idea that, as to whether or not Tom is sorry for what he did, truly sorry, sorrowful, ashamed of himself, recognizing the pain, feeling the pain that he inflicted on her and the extent to it, right? And really acknowledging it, right? And when he phrases it as what happened, it illuminates that minimization and distance that he has from his own behavior.
Our relationship, she didn't deserve it. Nobody deserves to have that happen.
Nothing happened. You did it.
Right. And the way that he frames it, I think, in his mind, and it shows in the way he says this, and I've been saying this throughout, and there's more and more evidence, that if he was some sort of Machiavellian psychopathic liar, he would do a much better job in these responses. We might be able to detect some shadiness there, but if he were better at this, he would at least act like he was sorry for what he did, because he would intuit that's what people are looking for. So I think he can't help himself but to reveal how he sees the world, you know? And I think that the way he sees it is that it did just happen, that it was something that was fated, something that there was no way around, because that's how he sees the world. And my top hypothesis is a passive-aggressive personality, which is in the realm of a pleaser personality and someone who is deeply angry at people close to them because they actually feel that they can't express themselves even though they can, but because of previous experiences, they think they can't. And so when you're walking around with that much resentment, that's kind of self-imposed, then you feel justified in doing what you're doing. I, have talked about this before. I think that, say you have a partner that is brutally abusing you for 20 years and is controlling you, is saying you're not worth anything, is putting you down, is spreading lies about you, and you start to think about breaking up with the person, divorcing the person, and maybe you hint at it, it's like, maybe our marriage isn't so great, and they get worse with their abuse, and you test the waters a few more times and realize, I can't get out of this safely, and you don't have access to a domestic violence advocate or a lawyer or a support system or a therapist that can help you. And so you're isolated, you're trapped, and someone comes along that listens to you, that is safe, and not only for emotional support, but also for romantic and sexual gratification. You meet him at work, and in the broom closet, you have your relationship. Do you feel bad? Should you feel bad? No, probably a lot of people would not feel bad. A lot of people from the outside would not think that that person should feel bad. So there's a chance that Tom actually feels that way, that he feels that's what he was going through, even though that was not what he was going through. And so it shows in the way he words things and his approach here.
I'm sorry for doing the one thing I said I wouldn't do, and I did it in the worst way possible. I love you and I apologize.
Nah. I didn't.
Okay. I'm sorry for doing the things for the one thing I wouldn't do. Yeah, under normal circumstances, I would say, well, maybe that illuminated. But given all the other things that he said, I don't think he actually is taking responsibility for the transgression. I think he's saying, look, in his mind, he thinks it was inevitable because my relationship with Ariana was so bad for so long, and Ariana was in such a bad state that I couldn't break up with her. He's repeatedly so. I think he believes he's, taking the high ground by not highlighting those things directly and highlighting what is the best version of his possible response.
Hit for me.
I didn't even listen.
Ariana, what have the conversations been like between you and Tom?
He has victim blamed me 100% of the way. So I don't believe anything that just came out of his mouth. I think he's fucking full of shit, and he can fuck off.
Yeah. Highlighting the victim blaming, that I think I might have said that phrase or something like that from the previous footage that we've seen. So I think that's accurate. And then the anger is also appropriate.
Finally, now he has agreed to at least let his assistant know when and where he will be so that I can try to avoid him at all costs.
Lala, I know when you and Randall broke up, you got out of the house pretty quickly. Do you think it's healthy for these two to be sharing the home?
No. Sandoval is Randall.
So, healthy, unhealthy, it's hard to gauge. Certainly, they have assistants and whatnot. They have the means possibly to afford a small apartment or to ask a friend, Schwartz, for example, to sleep on his couch. Certainly, that would make it easier for everyone, right? Well, for Ariana, maybe not for Tom Sandoval. But in my world, where people don't have all the means in the world, it's not uncommon to have, to go through something like this, or even just decide to divorce for non-infidelity reasons and to stay living together for a long time because of financial problems. And if you have kids, it makes it a lot easier for the kids if you're still around, right? If you can handle it and if it's healthy for everyone. So people will have these heuristics, these simplistic ways of seeing. It's like, well, that doesn't seem healthy. Why do you do that? And it's like, well, case by case. But I wonder if Ariana would say he's refusing to take action. He's the one who did it. He should move out. He should figure something out. I'm not going to move out. I didn't do anything wrong. Or is there something else going on? I don't know.
Give it 10 years, he is Randall Emmett. It's absolutely terrifying. I couldn't get Randall to stay home, and then when shit hit the fan, I couldn't get him the fuck out of the house.
There you go.
That is a fucking narcissist. Everyone needs to be warned about.
So there's that word. It's meaningless. I think this individual's name is Lala, and obviously Lala knows Tom Sandoval a billion times more than I do, but I'm just going to take a guess and say that if Lala were to lay out the justification or the criteria and the data to meet those criteria regarding a narcissist, I wouldn't frame it as a narcissist. Personality is such a complex concept, and in my field, there are experts on psychology who will even say the endeavor to categorize or describe personality is a fool's errand because it's such a squishy concept and it's hard to measure scientifically. When we look at a particular animal, we can categorize it, right? We could say, well, that's a bear and that's an elk. And as more, refined scientific measurements and technologies became available to us, we could further refine those taxonomies such to the point where you can look at the DNA of a bear. You could just look at the DNA of a cell and say, well, that's the DNA of a bear and that's the DNA of an elk. So we have these hard science ways of categorizing things. When it comes to personality, we do not have that. There's no DNA measurement. There's no, bears and elks, there are so many elements that distinguish them, right, and define them. And when it comes to a narcissist or even just personality disorders in the DSM or attachment styles or extrovert, introvert, or the big five, this kind of stuff, it's such a squishy area. And I can say that because my career doesn't depend on these concepts being considered hard science. When you talk to experts who their bread and butter are these topics, like forensic psychologists, which is where I specialized in that in graduate school and am trained as a forensic psychologist. And I would ask other forensic psychologists, my professors, these people, I'd be like, so what about all the literature that says that all these categories that were thrown out there, and there are a lot in forensic psychology, what about all the literature and the philosophy and the data that says that the labels we're applying to these individuals in court are pretty questionable, or at least there's a question about them? And I would get pushback, because for forensic psychology and other people along these lines, their career and their lives, their respect depends on these concepts being considered very concrete. So my point is that even among us that are experts in personality, we will say it's not something that is easy to understand. It might not even really exist, at least the way that we think of it today. I don't believe that. I think the data does show enough evidence that some taxonomies hold water and the application of labels do make sense to me. But in 50 years, 100 years, people could look back at me and say that I was deluding myself in the same way that we look back on people in our field 100 years ago about concepts that they just took for granted. So, I know enough to know that of that. So, for lay individuals to apply personality labels, I just will put that into all that context. But if Lala wanted to say Randall and Tom Sandoval are self-centered and exhibit behavior that lacks empathy and care and consideration for other people consistently, well, then I would not have to have ranted like I just did. I'd be like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I mean, we've seen evidence of that.
Fuck out of the house.
There you go.
That is a fucking narcissist. Everyone needs to be warned about this person. Like, this is a dangerous human being.
Lala, that's actually a ridiculous stance to start saying Sandoval's a dangerous person.
I didn't ask for anyone else's opinion.
Well,
Yeah, often when people are saying a narcissist, they're actually referring to psychopathic personality or antisocial personality. There's some definitions that would say they're the same thing, some that would say there's a lot of overlap, but the central feature of a psychopath or someone with antisocial personality, or what some people will call a sociopath, which is not the consensus term that we will use in the clinical literature, although you'll hear it online a lot. I think it's because psychopath is too confusing because there's so many other words that start with psych, and so people just think so. Anyway, so and I have done a whole deep dive on the difference between these three labels: psychopaths, sociopathy, and antisocial. And there's a fair amount of literature that it varies. But anyway, point is that when people are saying a narcissist, that's usually what they're referring to. And that's not the word that you would use. Often psychopaths, sociopaths, antisocial people will be narcissistic. They'll have a narcissistic trait, if you will, or they will exhibit narcissistic behavior, meaning that they lack empathy and they think of themselves. They're self-centered. They think they're better than other people, or they're entitled to things that no one else would be entitled to. No one else would think they're entitled to. And we would label that narcissistic. So there's that. We might also just label it psychopathic or antisocial. So anyway, I'm glad she actually clarified what she meant by narcissist. She said he's dangerous and harmful, and people need to be aware of that. And I think what she's referring to is behind the scenes, he is a monster. He is out to get people, the way a serial killer is, or the way a chronic con artist would be. There's not a shred of authenticity or humanity in this person. And that's possible. And it's very common for people to jump to that conclusion. You ask the average person, like, well, how many psychopaths, how many sociopaths do you think exist in the world? They'll be like, well, percentage-wise. They'll be like, well, in my anecdotal experience, according to my ex-boyfriends, I'd say about what, like 40, 50% of people, particularly men, and it's just not the case. Now, might you have randomly come across a lot of these individuals? Maybe, but not likely. It's because these concepts get talked about. So, she clarified that, and I felt like I needed to clarify it. I'm just yammering.
you have my opinion.
Well, that's great. I reject it. He was sleeping next to her. This was his life partner. If he can do that to her, there's something wrong with this person.
Briefly, I'm going to stop yammering so much, but briefly, if that were true, that people who cheat are psychopathic, antisocial, then yeah, we would be looking at 40% of the human race would be psychopathic monsters. And that's just not the case. Data shows, and my own personal experience shows, clinically, that perfectly moral, good human beings with, just as big of a heart as anyone else can absolutely cheat and sleep next to someone and lie straight to their face. It is disturbingly common, which is depressing and a bummer and sucks for all of us. So, I get the impulse to generalize that. It's like, well, how can you do that? And we have this notion in our society, again, just briefly, that if you exhibit that kind of behavior, then there must be something broken with your brain. You must be this different kind of human being. We have that urge because, murderers, people who murder, people who kill, it's a similar conceptual exercise that people will have. It's like, well, there must be something different because one, I'm not like that. And I couldn't possibly be like that, right? I need to distance myself from that person. So I'm just going to label them this like other thing. They're just like this broken, strange, alien type of human. And so you're trying to distance yourself. The other thing is that if we have this black or white looking at this behavior, then it reassures us because then we have a model for predicting in the future. It's like, okay, well then I just have to watch out for psychopathic monsters. Oh, okay. But that's not going to help. Being able to predict who is going to do harmful things like this to people, people who abuse people, people who cheat, people who embezzle money, people who lie straight to your face, people who tell your boss that you're a bad employee so that they can be promoted. These kinds of things can be psychopathic, can be committed by someone that lacks empathy, but more often than not, these individuals are just like you and me, and they're not the other. They're not alien. There's nothing different about them and nothing detectable about them. And that's very disturbing. It's very upsetting and it makes us uneasy.
His life partner, if he can do that to her, there's something wrong with
and
this
a lot
person.
of other people have done that before.
Absolutely.
And they're not
and a
dangerous
baby
people.
with one.
Right,
They are
exactly.
dangerous.
Well, if you're going to judge my character, you need to get in line and somewhere near the fucking back.
Now, if you're Tom, you should probably just be quiet. And the judgment of character is justified. I don't think it's the language that I would use, but his character is worth judging, not only for doing what he did, but the way he has responded once it came out. And the fact that it had to have been discovered for it to come out. I mean, his character, his personality is involved, just not in the language that, at least in my opinion, and there's no way to scientifically demonstrate that I'm right and Lala is wrong. That's kind of the point of what I was saying earlier. But I think that is the issue at hand. That would the best thing Tom could do for himself, so that he doesn't do this in the future. The best thing he could do to repair his relationships with everyone there is for Tom to discover what it is about his character that resulted in everything that's happened. Not to say that he's a psychopath or a narcissist, whatever that means, but whatever it is. And I've hypothesized about it before, right? And the other thing I'll say is what Lala saying make some sense? The answer is yes. For Lala to say, people need to be wary of Tom because he has demonstrated that he will harm people. Getting away from things like he's a narcissist or he's a psychopath or sociopath or whatever, then you can have a pattern, a predictable pattern of harming people we don't have to invoke language in the DSM. We can just say, look, that person, I don't know what's going on. And I just wish more people would do that. If you're not an expert, just say, look, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know what's going on with that person, with their personality. I just know we see a pattern. And I just wish people would, I feel like people need to use psychology language to justify themselves. And and I guess to the lay public it does. But to people like me, it just diminishes your argument. If you just said something like, look, people need to be aware that Tom has a pattern of harming others and cheating on them. And not just cheating, but other kinds of things. Lying, the way he reacted. He has exhibited a lot of behavior going back years and years, and God knows what else he has done. People need to be aware of that. He is harmful to other human beings and doesn't seem to care. That would hold water because that actually is true. But to use clinical language, then I'm like, oh.
Calm down.
I'm not going to calm down.
We're here for like 10 hours, for God's sake.
I understand.
You cannot start
and
like
we're
this.
ready to go.
Okay.
They're there for 10 hours? Yeah, we're like 5 minutes in. Maybe I should be more brief myself, because if they're here for 10 hours, then I'll be here for 50. Okay, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.